Assalamu alaikum students. This is Teaching Listening 2, Approaches to Listening Process and the Types of Listening Activities. In this video, we will go over the listening process, top-down and bottom-up processing with top-down listening activities and bottom-up listening activities. The main resource for this video is J. Wilson book, How to Teach Listening. When J. Wilson thought about how the listener processes the input, he came up with two models that describe the listening process. He called them the top-down and bottom-up processing. The first one is the top-down, which focus on using the background knowledge when the listener uses the background knowledge in understanding the general meaning of the message. So the focus here in this type is on the content, while on the other type of listening process, the listener relies on the language in the message, which includes the sounds, the words, and the grammar that creates the meaning. So the focus here is on form and structure. When a teacher uses the combination, when the listener uses the combination of top-down and bottom-up data, this is called interactive processing, and this is Noonan who came up with this term, not J. Wilson. The listener in this process use the context and the co-text to understand what came before the message and what will come after the message. So the comprehension here relies on what happens in the mind before the listening starts. And this helps the listener to understand what is heard and also helps him or her to anticipate, to guess what will come next. What types of listening skills do you think are developed here? The skills are macro skills. So these skills focus on the larger elements. Remember, we said that the focus here is on the content. It's not on the form or the structure. Right. So, and what types of activity the top, bottom, or bottom up involve here? What are some of the examples? What do they do? These are types of, let's start with the top down. These types of activity help the students to develop their own processing skills to be able to guess the meaning from the context or co-text. How do we do that? So we, as teachers, we encourage the listeners, the students, to use their schema, their previous knowledge of the topic to understand the content. So background knowledge is used here. This is one example. For example, as a teacher, I want to have a listening comprehension, so I introduce the vocabulary before asking the students to listen. So these are examples of the vocabulary that I introduced. So what do you think the topic of today's listening activity? So if you can notice that, it could be, what may parents do to prevent their children from gaining weight? Because we have overweight, it's not junk food, it's not only parents, it's not the kids. So from the vocabulary, you can guess that this is the topic of today's listening skills or listening comprehension. So this is one example of top-down activity. So what I did as a teacher, I used the schema, the previous knowledge of the students about this topic, and then I gave them the listening comprehension, and then I helped them to understand the content. Other examples is listening for the main idea or predict what's in the listening comprehension, what's coming. Let's go to the second one, which is bottom-up processing. Here, the listener focuses on This is a reminder. The focus is on forms and structure, where the listener relies on the language in the message. Remember? Okay. What type of listening skills do you think here? What types of listening skills are developed here? These are the micro skills. So the micro skills when the listener divides and decodes the sound signals and separates the speech into words. So an example is listening for specific details. Because when the listener attends for the smaller bits and bytes of language, he starts involving the bottom-up approach to the listening comprehension. So he divides the sound, he decodes the sound bit by bit, and then he develops the ability to separate the stream of speech into individual words, to smaller bits of language, and this is exactly listening by dividing the language element. What do you think happens when we want to design the activities? This is what we will do this in class. So the bottom-up activities help the student to understand enough linguistic elements of what they hear too, and then later on to be able to use their top-down skills to fill in the gaps. So an example of this is when I play an audio and ask the students to listen and put the pictures in order. They're not using the top-bottom activity processing. They're using the bottom-up activities because they're listening for the content, they are decoding the sound signals, they are separating the speech into words, so to put the pictures in order, or to, for example, to trace a route, or to read information about the topic, and then first, of course, and then play the audio and then listen to find whether or not the same points are mentioned, which we covered earlier. These are more examples of bottom-up activities. Which one is better? Which one is the best? What do you think? Yes, both are necessary. Both are used simultaneously. Actually, based on Wilson, successful listening depends on the ability to combine top-down and bottom-up processing. And this is what earlier we mentioned that Noonan talked about or named it interactive model. It refers to the process when both approaches are used during the listening. Using both strategies help the students to become more effective listeners in real life or longer classroom listening. How can this knowledge help you as a teacher? This knowledge, when you develop that supplementary material or you design listening comprehension activities, it's very important for you as a teacher not only to teach the bottom-up processing skills, but it's also important to help the students to use what they already know to understand the listening texts. So, good listening lessons go beyond the listening task itself, with related activities before and after the listening. So before, during, and after the listening, and this is what we will be doing in class on Wednesday. Right, okay. See you on Wednesday.